Welcome to another Strata Unscripted. You've got Tom Beattie and Katharine Olson, joined today by Yang Fei of Strata Engineering. Thanks, Yang.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Take it away, Katharine.
Take it away. Well, it's unscripted, but we did just talk a little bit about what kind of major topics we want to hit. Otherwise, I get too distracted. I think that's mostly what it is. I happen to have had the pleasure of having both of you as participants for the Strata Gal live events this past 2 weeks. And I would love to hear your perspective on what that experience is like. Because I know what my experience was as a facilitator, and I had so much fun.
Yang,
but I want to know what it was like to
session.
be my victim.
Yes, I did. I attended the first session.
Yang, go ahead. You attended the first session. I went to the second one as well. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the first one, based on my exposure to the Strata Gal live series, I think it is unique. And it is unique in a way whereby it transforms a very otherwise technical or academic experience into the different roles and responsibilities based on the Strata Property Act of councils and how they function into something that people can experience. You see, it transforms it from an academic experience into an experiential kind of a experience. So I think that was what really stood out for me. And you can really experience genuine frustrations when you're role playing, right? About why
you missed the second night. Oh my God. There was some real feelings going on for sure.
Yeah, and that's what made it truly memorable. And I think that's how the concepts are going to stick with people. Otherwise, it's like putting them through a Strata Managers course, right? The alternative would be, I mean, then they will have to read all the bylaws, they have to read all the rules and regulations, and guess what? At the end of the day, they're going to either sleep through it or nothing's going to stick, right? So, but what stood out was really the impression that it left on me after going through the whole process. So, yeah.
I agree. The second session was, I'm going to say, mobster themed, and it was about budgets and spending. And you can imagine, Yang, as unexpected things happened, how that played out as we all pretended to be the Strata Council making decisions on how to respond to a certain incident and where that money was going to come from, because you got to get it from the budget. And And of course, Katharine didn't make it an easy exercise. There were surprises that layered on top of the surprises. And just when you thought you'd figured it out, the real world came and gave you a twist. So I think that these are proving to give it a really unique exposure to anyone that's living in the Strata world to what happens. And they're a ton of fun. So well done, Katharine.
Thank you.
Yes.
You know what? I liked that everyone laughed where they were supposed to. I was like, yes.
Also, for the second session, because I wasn't there, and it sounds so fun even right now. I just am dying to know a couple of things about it. Okay. These are questions off the cuff. Okay. I totally didn't prepare for it. But number one, were there also people role playing as council and owners?
So for the second session, I didn't do the same setup. So first session was like Pan Am themed, the flight path, what the roles are, etc. Second session was, you know what it is? I got this idea in my head that it's always the vendors are fleecing us and the strategists are skimming the pot. So I was like, let's lean into it, go with the casino mobster theme. So I created a game called the Follow the Money Strata Financials game, and every table had one. They had a certain amount of chips to represent Strata dollars. They had a set of mock financials, and then they got thrown out scenarios. And you could see that same makeup. It was some council members, some owners, Strata managers, vendors, related professionals, some lawyers, and you could see the ones that were determined to do Strata right, and then their incredible annoyance when I would be like, well, you know what, you took too long to respond to that, and now your owners have put a mutiny on their hands, and they're doing a 20% petition to get rid of you. You know, and people would have genuine feelings about it, and it was really interesting because it plays out exactly like it does in real life. and it lets people see each other's perspectives in a safe, controlled environment.
Yeah. So I'm interested to know, what are the most interesting questions that popped up during the session, like that you're being asked?
Sometimes people have, okay, I'm going to not answer the question like I always don't answer questions directly. Just say things more indirectly. People do this a lot to me, where they ask questions thinking that they're going to get a certain answer if they lead me to it, especially like, well, what is your opinion on strata managers chairing AGMs? Was a spicy question that came up. And I was like, well, it's great when strata managers facilitate meetings, but of course the chairperson is per the bylaws, and public speaking is a major fear of many people, and I've seen this play out both ways, and it really is the comfort level of the council, and I could see this former council member owner churning that in his head, being like, I don't like that answer. And I think I have that effect on people a lot, actually.
Well, it was the best answer in the circumstances, right? Because everyone, I think, has been through meetings where they're not well chaired and they're not facilitated appropriately, and they can go very far off track, and they can take a very long time, and you don't actually get to the outcomes that you're looking for. So the right chair, the right facilitator for those meetings is really important.
Yeah, I agree.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree more than that, because at the end of the day, every meeting has its agenda. So a list of action items or objectives that it's supposed to accomplish, right? And
speaking of agendas,
I
was going to say, Just go ahead. I do that. I get distracted.
No. And oftentimes, because when it comes to topics such as repairs or expenditures, you're really dealing with some of the most emotional investments that one could make, and especially in today's market, in their lifetimes, is you know what I mean? So, and so there's a lot of emotions, and it's easy to get distracted by them, especially within the context of a council meeting. So, again, it's so easy to get into a yelling match or a screaming match that lasts hours and hours with no decided outcome in the end, right? So, and I mean, it's a double-edged sword that council members are volunteers and are paid for. Right?
The problem is again, you do have some council members who do go onto council for certain reasons, and sometimes that reason is to keep the fees as low as possible because they don't want to be there a long time. They just want to sell and get the maximum value and move on. And that will fundamentally be at odds with the new owners who intend to be there, and they have potentially, under new suggested regulations, a 50-year mortgage to pay off. You know what I mean? So we might in a few years down the road be talking about multi-generational mortgages.
Just in Europe.
So. But when I was saying, speaking of agendas, I just segue over to all the luncheons that we've been, not that I don't want to talk about Strata Gal Live the whole time, but we do have last session this week. I don't want to give away the whole, give away everything, all the secrets and the mysteries. But we've had the Surrey Board of Trade lunch recently that Yang, you and I were at. And then I was at the BCFSA Sector Forum this past week. There was the CCI webinar with the Minister of Housing, Christine Boyle. And there, what else? And then we talked about the UDI lunch on the last episode, but a lot of similar themes running through all of these luncheons, I have to say. And I would really love to hear your opinion overall on what was said at that Surrey White Rock Board of Trade luncheon. The topic was housing and the future of housing. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I wasn't at that one. What did you hear?
Well, for me, I think a lot of, it was a panel discussion, and there were representatives from various sides. I mean, mostly from the developer side. in that particular case. And the developers, I feel a lot of recurrent theme is about red tapes, right? In terms of bureaucracy, in terms about regulation and whatnot, about developmental costs. Now, don't get me wrong, developmental costs are high, but it's going to be high in Vancouver regardless, because of the labor markets over here where we are, right? Somehow it could lead to someone who's uninformed could be led to think that it's high because we have got very high standards in terms of building codes over here, or regulatory standards are too high, and therefore it causes development costs and all that kind of stuff. Now, and that's what's causing what we're seeing in the housing market in terms of new builds and whatnot. Well, I think that it is really important to really differentiate and really look into the causes of these kind of higher costs, and ultimately what leads to, or what is a result of lower productivity. You see what I mean? Because when you're talking about an average project, like let's say the permitting fees and whatnot are going to be a certain portion of it, not the main portion thereof. And based on our experience when we're on the receiving end, for those who don't know, we only work on existing buildings. What we are noticing is significant amount of deficiencies in the new buildings that are already being built. And also the BC Building Code is a baseline in terms of a minimum for building standards. It is not, a lot of times it is not covering what's required in terms of industry best practices, right? See? So I personally think that when we look at developmental costs or costs as a whole, we'll need to be really honest about which components are driving it up, right? And not just a blanket statement saying less regulation, less inspections and all that. When you look at, ask any owner who has been through a warranty claim whether they think that inspections should be reduced or official red tapes or permitting processes should be watered down.
I want to just give a snippet from one of the BCFSA panels on some suggestions that one of the panelists had in areas that were extras that are adding up DC costs. So environmental and sustainability policies and contributions, art fees, inclusionary zoning to allow different socioeconomic statuses to participate in the housing market, seismic requirements for safety, and adaptability needs for those with disabilities. So when the development industry is talking about DCs and what needs to be cut, that's the suggested list they're giving, is all the things that humans need. Yeah.
Yeah, so
I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yes, and also another thing that we cannot forget is one of the questions that I do have, and I asked the economics representative over there, the economist, I think, of the city of Surrey, the city economist, how much of a contribution is due to a credit crunch, you see what I mean, that the developers are facing, right? So it may not be a technical issue that they're facing, and it's always easy when we come up with anything, when we come up to any challenges, it's always easy to blame the technical aspects of it, right? Regulatory, permitting, this requirements, that requirements.
You hear that a lot. Oh, the performer requires it.
Right, exactly.
As if that means that it's true, though. That's the problem that I have is, and this was a really great quote from Jasmine Towers at BOZA on the panel at the BCFSA. She's a fantastic speaker. She said, figures lie and liars figure. And I loved that because I hadn't heard that in a long time. Just because the performer says something doesn't mean that it's the truth. And also, speaking about the economists, is there's a lot of graphics at these lunches to do with return on investments and profit margins and things like that. And they will show line graphs and charts with vague percentages. They don't usually show final numbers, and they never, ever, ever tell you what the final dollars were that they made. And I have a bit of a problem with that. So, because when we're talking about what kind of capital is flowing through here versus how much of a microscope we're coming down on these DCs to bring in inclusive zoning and disability access, if we're looking at the hard numbers to cut those things, then we should also look at some of the hard numbers of what the return on investments and profits are looking like too. So just being equitable here in our knowledge sharing, that's all.
And also a lot of thing about return on investments and profit, like one thing we need to really differentiate is between a business need of the developers, right? And that's obviously legitimate because in terms of return on investment, profitability and all that, it is what the developers can tolerate, right? And also there's another side of it is the non-negotiables, right? Non-negotiables meaning like basically city permits, safety standard, right? And also policies,
labor standards and stuff
labor
like that.
standards,
Yeah.
and also policies that the city would enact in light of its demographic needs, right, over time, you see. So, for instance, I was in Japan for a conference recently, right, and the Japanese government is actually trying to attract foreign investment, and they really just put out saying that, look, Tokyo has already had such a high density, right? And now what we are dealing with is an aging population over there, right, for Tokyo. Now, guess what? With the as-built environment of Tokyo, when it's so densely populated with older buildings, age-friendly considerations at that stage becomes much more expensive and much harder. Okay, when you already have like already built infrastructure. So now when you look at, for instance, accessibility considerations, I actually think that it is a good time for the city to consider that, right? Considering that right now we're talking about increasing densification, because when you try to incorporate age-friendly...
But also just as a digression, inclusivity
Yeah.
is not just for people like, or, you know, like accessibility is not just for people with disabilities.
Right.
Like if you're a mother holding your kid and your groceries, or you're moving into a new building, or you have a wagon with you because of something, like any number of reasons that normal people benefit from accessibility, to be very frank as well.
Absolutely.
As a digression.
And this forward thinking is super important because guess what? When you have got all the high rises that are so-called inaccessible or basically lack accessibility features already built and trying to convert them or increase accessibility, then it's always going to be a lot more expensive.
But it's out of sight, out of mind. They will be done. The transaction's over. That amount of capital, to use the language of their own industry, has already been extracted, and the end buyer, who is already spending the next 30 years just paying for that transaction, also has to cough up the money to pay for another building's entire life during that period too. So they essentially have to pay for that building twice in their life. And that's just the way it is, right? It's a terrible system, though, to be honest. I don't love it. It's not super great. I don't know.
No, I think that I think that you're right, Katharine, and I think that all this points to the fact that we, in our planning, in terms of our city, and in lockstep with all the requirements for any kind of development or engineering and construction, it needs to be done with a lot of foresight, right? With better vision in terms of the longer term view, right? And that longer term view, I mean, it needs to extend past a typical election cycle of 4 years, right? You see, I mean, so, and I think that we would really benefit from that kind of a longer term thinking and also longer term perspective, right? So.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's interesting though, you said about extending past the next cycle, because again, things that I heard in those luncheons really indicates to me that the general sentiment in those rooms is the not going that way. Some of the quotes that I heard said by city officials, just basically about how they don't care what they have to do or who they have to take from in terms of other municipalities. They want your capital in their city now. and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. Like, that is scary to me. And to hear too, like in one municipality's Board of Trade luncheon, hearing officials, elected officials, trashing another municipality's policies. Like, these are all just humans. We don't stop at the city lines. Lots of people work and live across multiple municipalities. So our interests are always going to be divided across the entire region. We can't be behaving like little factions and silo and become suspicious and harming each other. It's not going to be the winning way here. I mean,
so on one hand, I do believe that, competition between different municipalities is healthy if managed properly. There needs to be guardrails around it, because if you compete, different municipalities compete in terms of their favorability towards investment to bring in capitals in. They're trying to create pro-business or business-friendly approaches. There's nothing wrong with that, but there needs to be more collaboration, and there needs to, again, be guided by a vision of improving, right? Of improvement, rather than.
I think I'd like to see the word ethical and moral used more than just legal in these discussions too, because like thinking, I agree with you, competition is healthy and productivity and innovation, but at the regulators forum, when you hear them saying, well, productivity and competitiveness, those attract capital. So in some senses, they're actually at this juncture more important than consumer protection. That again tells me a lot about what the attitudes are of that group right now that has the capital.
I think it's fascinating that they're saying that. I've never heard a regulator say that, and it surprises me to hear it, and it makes me a little bit happy, because I think that regulators love to regulate, and the fact that they might be realizing that they are one of many factors that can alter the outcome of a business, the viability of a venture to succeed is real. And I think that the fact that they're observing that they are a potential hindrance to new business or to growth is interesting. I personally wish that they would do everything that they can do and continue to do it in terms of regulatory function and ensuring consumer protection. I'd just rather not see them spend our dollars on advertising to tell us that that's what they're doing. I know that's what they're doing. I don't need a radio ad to tell me that their purpose is to protect consumers.
Or to do their second major restructuring in like the last 5 years. Like, that's just more waste, right? Just think too, another couple of notes thing, like coming from, again, that same panel. This is housing officials, major nonprofits and associations likening to the electoral body or the human capital that we aren't hurting enough. And that, if we look at situations like Normandy Beach with the war effort speed, that's what we need to bring to the housing market and building it. To hear people who are in very privileged positions using stories and examples like this at a major regulatory sector luncheon, I just sat there and I hope no one was looking at my face, because it would have given away my entire opinion the entire time. I was pretty horrified, I'm not going to lie. Yeah, that was pretty bad.
I think we got a huge generational divide between people's understanding of how good or how bad the economy and the outlook is. And, my parents' generation does not feel what my staff and my team feel. And they're coming at life from very different perspectives. And I don't know how to address that, but the fall in our productivity as a nation has been remarkable. You think of how great technology is getting and has become, and how much we can do, and how we're not keeping up with the productivity of our neighbors and the other developed economies is very disappointing.
Because it's not just a productivity crisis, it's a values crisis. What good is increased productivity if you're not using it to take care of people? Like if you're just using it to hoard the wealth at the top, you're actually holding back the economy, because those that are passing capital in the middle income, lower income economy, capital actually flows faster. I get that $10 and I have to pay for daycare, and then they pay for food, and then they go take a cab somewhere and they do this. Like that, there's all those different parties that are stimulated economically, versus if it just flows upwards and then they hoard it in the Cayman Islands or in REITs and other areas that they are legally, whatever they're doing, fine, but it's not helping their people who are
I gave you
striking
the
in
eye
the tens
roll
of thousands.
on
So,
that, because the eye roll was for the fact that productivity doesn't matter as much as it matters way more than values. If you do not have the productivity and you are not making the pie bigger, you are cutting the existing pie into smaller, more meaningless pieces. And so I'm a huge proponent
well,
for
the
making
problem is you'd
the pie
think
bigger.
that that's the case, but once the pie gets bigger, they're like, well, it's bigger now, so we can take more, and just, they're fine still. And then we end up, if you look at the wealth spread in all the different generations, millennials and Gen Z share the same piece of pie. Like, we're way past that, that metaphor. I feel like, I don't know.
I think it's number one. I think it's a balance. But when you ask if productivity falls and some of the reasons for it, as a business owner and also someone who worked in tech, in both medtech and also in construction, I can say that it's our education really falling behind in terms of equipping people with the hard skills, right? Like, for instance, when you look at, and I will say that, and I will say a balance, and you very quickly realize why. For instance, when you're looking at the Asian countries, the number of engineering PhDs that they graduate, right? It's probably 10, 15 times. And I'm not talking about just because of their population base, right? But based on the interests and also based on how they're brought up to value those fields, right? In terms of equipping them with the hard skills to
But then
navigate.
in turn, the municipalities can't cut all the planning departments that are going to employ those engineers, right? Because
Correct.
then again, that's the values. If we don't value red tape and consumer protection and public safety,
Absolutely.
those engineers are out of work.
Absolutely, Catherine. And
Yeah.
on the flip side, at the same time, you won't be able to create efficiency when you only have a very limited pool of talent in that space. You see what I mean? When you look at countries with higher productivity, when you look at countries with higher, basically some output per GDP or things like that, you very quickly realize sometimes you can't compare apple to apple because of the base of their talent pool, right? For instance, Steve Jobs or Tim Cook once says that you could count on the number of people in terms of the number of industrial engineers that in North America you have, versus you could fill up football fields of industrial engineers when you're in Asia, right? So when you have got a very limited talent pool to begin with, then really amongst the talent there is going to be less competition for.
But why is there less of a talent pool, right?
That's a very good question, and the reason why I think is because of what we value as a society. You see what I mean? Like what we value as a society, and the values part will play a role in, for instance, like how are you going to engage more women or more of the into the tech fields, right? Inside. And I think that last I
Or
heard was
construction, to be
in
honest, but it
all
would never
construction.
appeal to me to work in those fields based on what I know those environments would be like for me as a woman.
That's right. For instance, a couple of years back now, they did a study, and interestingly, when you look at tech, this was an example in tech, right? And they look at tech in terms of women in the C-suite, right? Like there is over 80% more women in the C-suite in a country like China compared to North America, right? And then for all of the values that we exalt about North America being free and all that, right? You will see that, okay, how come their talent pool is so much stronger, right? When you're looking at when you look at some of the Asian countries, especially in China and also in Singapore as well. So what are the draws for women in those countries to be in tech, right? Because when you start with a very limited talent pool, your productivity is going to be fixed. There's no way that you're going to raise your productivity when you only have so many, like out of 10 AI engineers over here versus like 1,000 in China or 1,000 in the States. And you're left wondering, oh, how come our productivity in AI is much lower than either of those countries?
I don't know anything about it, but I'd be really curious to know more about the compensation structures and like benefits and things like that too, because I think that is a big driver of the crisis here is that people are not motivated. Where's the motivation when things like pensions and RSP matching and all those other things that our parents' generation were afforded don't really exist for us anymore. And me busting my butt that much harder and putting in that many extra hours doesn't usually mean that I'm going to get much more, if anything. And I'm probably going to get replaced by AI. So
nobody teaches like you do, Katharine, and certainly not an AI. I would say that there's a certain academic discipline that I see lacking in North America, and that our education system has migrated further away from what I consider to be a good standard since I was educated. And I don't think that that contributes to an environment of having more of the supply of these types of skills. And I find that the accommodations being made to equalize the students or to put them into one harmonious bucket and not recognize their strengths and weaknesses is causing a problem. And
yeah,
I don't know how to fix that, but I think that one of the
you
reasons that we
let the
see
ones who are good at teaching the right way do their jobs. Because, like, again, at the CCI forum, the Minister of Housing said that she recognizes that stratas are volunteers and they struggle and they need support. But then in the same conversation, she said, well, there's a 2020 study about the Ontario Strata Council education system, and there's no discernible proof that it really leads to any meaningful compliance or engagement. And how many times have I said, Thomas, like, yeah, the only thing Ontario can say is that they have education, but when you look at it, and I've looked at it because I am obsessed with strata education, it's terrible. It's scale model cheaply as possible, and that's it. If you put real meat into it, put some effort, do it like you care, people would respond. When people think you don't care, why should they care? Right?
at that
I'll
point,
just say
the
that.
regulation and the education has become red tape. It's now shrunk your pool of willing volunteers because they have to not only do the volunteer work, but they need to train. I joked about it, but in my kids in minor hockey, I'm a safety. I have got a 3-year window under my training. I will not retake that training. It was awful. It was time lapsed. I had the same information from 3 different programs. Like after my 3 years, I'm done. I'm a volunteer, but I'm not coming back. I feel like the same thing could happen in a poorly executed education program. And I think that we should come up with something that people want to take, that they value. If I came out at the back of it going, hey, now I feel better equipped to take care of these
So,
children.
what was it that you guys were saying about Strata Gal's live training to do with Strata Councils earlier?
Well, it was interesting, right? And we
And
got
you
through
had
some of those
fun
real
and you
dynamic.
learned.
We
It
did, and there was
can be
tension
done.
among people that really didn't have a reason to
No
strongly
stake
care
in
about
the
the exercise. It's
those
crazy.
financials were completely made up. If you looked at the AR list, like it was like Tony Montana and Elvira, and there was a whole
They held
story.
up pretty well though,
Yeah,
Katharine. I've
I
looked at a
know.
lot of budgets and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is about right. Management
Did you
fees,
run it through
35 bucks
Eli
per door."
Report?
No, but I did check it and ran the numbers and I was like, "It's not bad."
Thanks. Yeah, it's almost like I know what I'm doing.
Yes.
Oh
What about
man.
I want to talk just for a few minutes about the engineering side of this world. We've got Yang here. Yang,
Yes.
you're in that business. You run Strata Engineering. There's been a big change. I know it's boring, but next year everybody needs a new depreciation report. Thank gosh, because some of them we're seeing are still from 2013. They've taken advantage of their waiver for as long as they could. Are they out of time? Can they get in the queue still? what's it going to take for stratas who know that they've got to get this new depreciation report out?
They can, and I think stratas will need to understand that the report is more than a tool to satisfy a legislative requirement, right? Because they need to get they need to change the mindset about how they manage their buildings. Number one, buildings will require maintenance and repairs over time. Building components don't last forever, right? And I think that's one thing that really need to get into people's heads, because some people living in strata still live with a mindset that, you see, I chose strata because there's no maintenance or there's no kind of replacement involved compared to a single family home, right? Like, well, granted, I mean, most of the materials are actually the same. You see, they're just employed at a different scale, right, for the single family homes and for strata buildings or multi-unit, multi-family complexes. So depreciation reports, not a bad thing. It's not a be-all end-all. It is more of a financial budget to guide capital expenditures over a 30-year period of time. It's just really saying that, hey, we need to collectively be aware of these things that needs to go on, right? So I think once we have that mindset shift, then it's much easier for people to accept it. Because right now what we're seeing is that a lot of strata's decisions on when to get a depreciation report is purely driven by deadlines that are set by the government. Well, deadlines set by the government in relation to your building is arbitrary, right? Because the real deadlines happens within the building when you notice the drip through your ceiling. You see what I mean? Like, those are the real deadlines that the building is going to physically tell you that, hey, I need some care, right? Like, and regardless of whether you do a depreciation report or not, you're going to be faced with that, right? So knowing is better than not knowing, right? And I really think that we need to get on that whole idea that, hey, why am I doing a depreciation report? It's not just to fulfill an arbitrary deadline set by the legislation, but how do we make the most use out of our depreciation report in guiding decisions for capital investment? Right?
So it reminds me of Grey's Anatomy, when, the person doesn't go to the doctor for years because they don't want to know the answer of why they have this giant tumor coming out of them. And it's like, well, I don't know about it, so it's not there yet. I am such a fan of the depreciation report, even if the council doesn't use it as the plan to the T of the 30-year cycle. Just having a list of all the components from people who know what they're talking about, set with the details and a framework of a snapshot of what those components are at right now, allows you to literally put that into your maintenance schedule chart and start to build a plan for regular recurring maintenance. So it is the best thing ever. I tell 4-unit and less stratas to even reach out to places like Strata Engineering and Yang and asking to put together like a bare bones version of a depreciation report. It doesn't have to be to the SPA standards, because you're not required to get one. And even if you're 4 units or less as a multiplex, if you get one, you're not required to continue to update it because you're still exempt. So even having it once gives you a framework. And if you're 4 units or less, you're probably self-managed and you have no idea what you're doing. So highly recommend reach out to Yang for that, by the way.
There's good and bad news in a depreciation report, right? Because there are assets that where you are either lucky or you've done good preventative maintenance, they'll last longer than the original schedule had indicated. And that might mean that you're pushing back a capital expenditure a certain amount of time. But being aware of what's going to need that work more urgently, and that, especially in what I consider to be that 5-year tactical horizon, is really important. And it allows you to refocus your budget and to have the conversations with owners way before you get to the SGM where you're asking for the special levy. And that's really what I want more people to think about, because they are so prevalent in BC and we've got to do better.
Yeah, you've seen some pretty funny Form Bs. We've had some interesting AGMs. Yang and I were at an AGM where we were presenting to an ownership that had clearly delayed things for so long. and they were there to talk about a building envelope project. And I was just stepping in for the manager who was of note on the file. They did not, they didn't like the mirror that I had to hold up to them. And I think as owners, from a strata manager, I can say, well, we can forgive you for losing your heads when you get, the bad news that you haven't been keeping up with your maintenance, as long as you make good choices afterwards, and that just little blow up was your tantrum, you calm down and you make good choices. But where it comes is when you have a tantrum and then your ego kicks in, and then you start doubling down that it must be the engineer or the strata manager or the brokerage or the past council. None of those things matter. You have to make a decision now. You have to maintain your property and move forward. So just stop it, like smarten up, move on, come on. But that, yeah.
It's emotional. Yang said it, right? It is your asset. It is your home. It is also very expensive, and you're not planning necessarily to get this bad news. So it is very emotional, and that makes it really hard.
It's not really bad news though. I hate when people act like it's such a surprise. And I'm like, when you did that giant sale that cost probably multi-millions of dollars, did you read all of the documents? And I have to say, I think that the answer is no a lot of the time.
Well, that's why I have a business. So, I want people to see that stuff. I want them to understand it better.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, it's only as good a mirror as they're giving you to hold up. When I'm holding up the mirror for a 13-year-old depreciation report, the building components are not going to have the life that were predicted at that time.
You know what that is? That is Captain Ron when Martin Short looks at the photo of the boat in the picture, and then he looks down, and then the boat's on the dock, and it's like,
right.
Well, the picture's a little older.
Yeah, exactly. And you need those updated costs and things. So anyway, talk to Yang. That's the whole point of this. It's like Yang will give you the answers that you may or may not want to hear, but you must know. So, that this sort of planning is important. Katharine, was there anything else from any of the sessions that you attended, or Yang, your thoughts on those that we should cover?
No, I'm gonna be writing an article about it anyways. I think the takeaway was, and it was interesting because they talked about solutions at all of these lunches too, and this is hilarious to me because I know how hard it is to fight for education in this industry. The number one thing and the number one solution every time that people had was education. So, do your due diligence, use engineering reports, use proper data, and educate yourself. So you got the trio here. You have the trifecta of solution on this call, honestly.
Fantastic. Yang?
Yeah, I think that's Katharine summarized it very well, right? And at the end of the day, we're here to provide solutions. And always remember, as part of a strata or anything else in your life, identifying the problems is often not enough. It's only the first step to finding a solution, right? And the ultimate goal is always to find solutions, and we should always be solutions oriented, whether we are part of a municipality, whether we're part of the engineering, whether we're part of construction, or regardless of the field you're in. And ask yourself, how could you contribute to being part of the solution? Right? So
that is a great point. I've heard that stress comes from knowing that something's not right and not doing anything about it. So take those actions and make it happen. Katharine, Yang, thank you so much. This has been a great session.
Thank you.
See you all next time. Thanks.
Thank you.